Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. This is City Talk. He's been named one of New York's super lawyers, involved in some of New York's most celebrated cases. He's received papal honors. He's been an instrument of peace in Northern Ireland and a champion of immigrant rights in the United States. He's Brian O'Dwyer, senior partner in the law firm of O'Dwyer Bernstien, which specializes in labor law, employee benefit funds, personal injury, government representation, civil rights, and immigrant rights. He is also the founder of the Emerald Isle Immigration Center, and he is a frequent commentator on radio and television on the law. And he's here to talk today about immigration, Ireland and the Irish, religion and politics, the 2000 election, and a lot more. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you.
Let's do a little bio. You are a descendant of a very prominent New York City family, nephew of a former mayor, son of the legendary Paul O'Dwyer. What was it like growing up in such a political and celebrated family?
It was terrific. I mean, I can't remember a day when we didn't sit around the table on a Sunday night and discuss issues of the day. We had, I remember being on a picket line at 6 years old.
Oh, right.
I remember in high school picketing Woolworths and with the sit-ins. I remember marching with my dad and Percy Sutton in Memphis, Tennessee, and Oxford, Mississippi. Wow. For civil rights. It was terrific. It was a wonderful, wonderful childhood, filled with a huge amount of excitement.
Oh, I imagine. And you sort of took up the mantle of defender of progressive causes. Your father defended striking workers, African-American civil rights, communists, etc. And this sort of came naturally to you. After having Googled you, you've been involved in a broad variety of, I would call, progressive causes. And it seems it came from your background.
Well, my father had one philosophy that he always taught me and the rest of our family. He said that on this time of year, when he sat down and looked back on his year's work, if the only thing he did was make money, then that year was a total and absolute failure.
Nice criteria. Nice criteria.
I've tried to live my life that way. I tried to make sure that within every year that there is something going on, or a case or something, where I've tried to make a difference in people's lives.
The Irish ascendancy in New York, the Irish ran the city. They ran Tammany, they ran the government. Has that passed? As your father, in a sense, the last of the Irish politicians, despite the Quinns and the Crowleys out there?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that, sure, there's a big difference in the sense that there aren't as many Irish here. They've moved on. They've moved up. They moved up. They moved out. So the vast concentrations that there once were aren't here. But I think when you see the type of younger Irish politicians, Irish-American politicians, who both identify themselves as being progressives and Irish-Americans in the best interests of our people. And I'm thinking like a Joe Crowley or Christine Quinn. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no question that they are Irish to the core, and they are also real leaders of progressiveness in this town.
So there's sort of an Irish ethos out there.
Oh, absolutely. I think as an Irish American and as a progressive, I'm enormously proud of the leadership that people like that have shown in Daniel O'Donnell, of Tom Dwayne, people of that sort, who have been very much part of understanding what being Irish is all about, and at the same time understanding the progressive movement in this town.
Is there an Irish American vote, however, or even a Catholic American vote, or Catholic New York, or Irish New York vote? I know you're part of, Irish Americans for Hillary. Do Irish people vote as Irishmen, or Catholics vote as Catholics?
Well, I think there's not a block vote per se, but I think there are issues. There are a lot of issues that Irish and Catholics are very, very much involved in. One of the reasons that Hillary and Bill Clinton have been so involved and so popular in the Irish American community is that we felt that they were our champions, and that they brought peace to Northern Ireland and prosperity to the island of Ireland. So those of us who identified, and many do with that situation, owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to both of them. There are other issues, of course. There are issues of social justice. There are issues of immigration. There are issues of life issues. All of those are a panoply of issues that Catholics, on the whole, are very concerned about.
Okay, let's turn to one of those issues, one that I know that you are very interested in, both as a progressive activist and as an attorney. Immigration. It is becoming a top issue, if you will, particularly in the Republican march to the nomination. Talk about the general issue of immigration, where we are, and then we'll specifically talk about Governor Spitzer's licensing plan, sort of an archetype of the issue.
Well, I was extremely disappointed that people of good faith, like Senator Kennedy, like Senator McCain, Senator Graham, were not able to put together a comprehensive immigration reform.
That would include what, in your mind?
Well, I think the most important thing on any immigration reform is that the number of illegals here, 20 million, 10 million, whatever it be, that they have a path to citizenship.
Okay.
I think that's the number one issue. I think all the other issues are peripheral to that issue.
And at least the way the Republican primary and that dialogue, and certainly around Spitzer, wasn't that at all. It's border enforcement, tightening up the hiring practices. Arizona's law, really draconian in terms of immigration. Where do we go?
Well, I'm really very concerned. As an Irish person, who my history tells us that in the 1840s, during a period of recession or depression in the United States, the scapegoat was the immigrants. The sign that went up all over this country that Irish need not apply was endemic of an anti-immigration feeling. I have that feeling, unfortunately, that we're getting close to that in this country, which is that we all know that this country is in a very sour mood. All the polling shows that 2/3 of the people think we're going in the wrong direction. A vast majority of people think for the first time that their children's lives are going to be worse rather than better than theirs. I mean, the whole...
Yeah, there's a real winter of discontent.
Whole discontent in this country. And I'm afraid that what's happening is that people are channeling that discontent rather into finding solutions or seeing the real problems. They're channeling that into an anti-immigrant feeling.
Yeah, and an op-ed piece that you did for the Daily News in October on the Spitzer driver's license plan, you called the actions of the county clerks morally repugnant, and then you talk about a larger level of xenophobia and bigotry. I mean, are we entering one of these really xenophobic periods that your ancestors saw and fellow countrymen saw?
I think you have to just...
In the 1840s?
You just have to substitute the word Irish in the 1840s for the word Latino in the...
Or Italians and Jews.
Or Italian Jews at the turn of the century.
Right.
I think that's where...
It is that hot, and it is that intense now, you believe.
Well, look, I mean, nobody is talking about putting a wall up around Canada, all right?
Right.
And the reason is because there is illegal immigration coming in from Canada. We all know it, but it happens to be European and white and not Latino.
So it's racist in some sense.
There's no question that racism has a large part of this. Otherwise, why are we not concentrating on the Canadian border? You know, we don't want a certain type of people coming in here. It's as simple as that.
Okay. You argued and won a case in, I guess, 2 years ago. The headline of the press release read, "Undocumented Mexican day laborer wins $4 million settlement after construction accident left him crippled." What was the impact of this? Give us some background and the impact of that case.
Well, I think it's a very important case because what happened was it was a Mexican laborer working on a project in the Bronx, totally exploited, no safety features, no hard hat, nothing that an ordinary worker is entitled to. The scaffold was flimsy, it collapsed, and left him totally without an ability to work. He'd severely injured. The boss came along and said to him, well, you know, you're illegal. He went to lawyers who said, well, you're illegal, you have no rights in the United States, and maybe you should just go home. We took up the case and said, look.
How did it come to you?
Through the Association Tepeyac, which is the Mexican immigrant, the group that really is the...
Very influential and real solid folks. We've worked with them at Baruch, training nonprofit leaders through them.
Yeah, and they came to us and said, look, there is... can you do anything? We've been told by these lawyers that, that there is no rights here and this doesn't seem right. We took the case and we proved that once a worker is on the job, and that's established that precedent, that once the worker is on the job, he is entitled to the same rights as any other worker. And so he's entitled to minimum wage, he is entitled to safety, is entitled to, at least to be secure in his person while he's working on that job. He may not have the right to the job, but once you have him there, he is entitled to the same rights as any American.
What is the jurisdiction of the case? Who does it affect?
It affects all illegals.
All illegals in the United States or in New York?
In New York State.
In New York State. What is this?
But let me just say that this case has been used and established as a precedent in many other places.
I would think that it would be. Okay, let's turn to the Irish. Let's look first. We've sort of peeked at them in New York. Let's look at them in Ireland. You were, you know, I would argue instrumental in Clinton's peace initiatives. You accompanied Clinton on each of his 3 trips. You were an advisor in Irish affairs. Can you talk about, and you alluded to it earlier, working with the Clintons during the 90s and what the story is today?
Well, of course, success has 1,000 fathers and defeat is but an orphan. And so I was one of many, many people that participated in the peace process. I think it was the important first step was taking Bill Clinton, a governor from Arkansas who probably never saw an Irish person in his life in terms of that type of activism, and teaching him originally what was all about. We had a presidential forum here just before the primaries, and one of the things we...
And this is in '92?
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the things we urged upon him as an initial first step was that Jerry Adams, who was the leader of the Catholic population, Sinn Féin, had been barred from the United States for so-called terrorist activities. And he represented 43% of the population of that. And as long as he was barred from the United States, that population felt that there was no way for them to gain equality or equal justice by the ballot box. They needed the bullet. And we indicated...
And so the United States and Irish Americans were that important to the process and perceived to be that important?
Absolutely, because at that point in time, who were they to look for at? The English government certainly was not somebody that they were going to look to champion them. And then if the United States government was not looking to engage, then there was no engagement. If there's no engagement, there's only one thing you can do.
And that's
take up the gun. We fought, after Bill Clinton got in, Irish America fought very hard for that visa. It was a closely contested thing. The State Department
very hot,
totally opposed to it. Of course, the British government totally opposed to it. And we were lucky we had somebody of the moral gumption of Bill Clinton who sat down and said, "This is the right thing to do. You do not make peace by not engaging the people who are part of that process." And that was the initial first step toward what today is a peaceful, total peaceful resolution of the process in Northern Ireland.
Talk about sort of the steps to today, and literally, and off camera, you were very optimistic about about the future. Talk about the steps and where we are.
Well, I think that the first step was initially to engage.
Right.
And you had to overcome centuries of distrust and fighting between the two populations. So it wasn't an easy thing. The first thing that the brilliant thing that Bill Clinton did was appoint George Mitchell as a mediator, who was probably the finest mediator that I have ever seen in my life. He would sit down with huge patience and listen to probably both sides saying the most outrageous things about each other, and then take that and then let it cool down and then come back again and then come back again and then come back again, until finally the Easter Accords, the Good Friday Accords, were arrived at the end of the Clinton administration. And then it took time for that to
now those let me just interrupt for a second. Those accords did what, briefly?
Basically what they did was establish a framework for peace.
Okay.
They established the Northern Ireland Assembly. They established the framework that there would be representation from both communities, the end to gerrymandering, that the police department would no longer be the problem for the Catholic population. Was the police department was totally seen as a Protestant occupying force, a force of oppression. Mm-hmm. As long as you had a police department and a military that were seen as a force of oppression, somebody else had to come out and enforce the laws of those neighborhoods. We basically, over the years, the Northern Ireland Assembly was established. There were many, many bumps in the road. The police department was reformed under and using the good offices of John Jay, Jerry Lynch, the president, mm-hmm. and Jerry Lynch, who really took a large hand in giving out the blueprint of the police department, so that now there's a kind of an equal opportunity situation where, for every Catholic and there has to be a Protestant put onto the police force, so that eventually it'll be at least a 50-50, mm-hmm. and things of that sort. So that we led up to today, which was basically at the very last moment, was this going to work this year? And as it turned out, it worked. It's working.
The elections proceeded.
There were elections. There were free elections. There were a bunch of parties that won. The Rev Paisley's party won the most votes.
Yeah, and let's just talk about Rev Paisley for a moment. I mean, he is the symbol of Protestant Northern Ireland and has been for 40 years. You met him on your recent trip with Council Speaker Quinn in March and other elected officials. What was that like?
Well, it was.
That's like meeting the devil, no?
In a way, it was. I mean, we didn't know what to expect, because over the course of the years, we had all been schooled in the Ian Paisley, who had, cursed the Pope at the European Parliament and had made many intemperate remarks. But it became very apparent when we were there that he was willing and wanting to deal, that he had made mm-hmm. that leap, mm-hmm. that decision, that for his people, his constituents, they needed to go forward and discuss issues that had not, as they call them, constitutional issues, but bread and butter issues. I mean, in one way, it was totally absurd when Chris Quinn and I were there to think about, after 30 years or 40 years of struggle, we sat down and discussed with both sides the question of how much the water bills were going to be.
You've made progress. You know.
Now we know we made progress.
You've done it.
Yeah. I mean, so that both sides, and of course both sides, like New York, could buy onto the fact that they didn't want their water bills to go up.
Absolutely. I mean, there are certain common interests.
So, and since then, both Martin McGuinness, who's from Sinn Féin, and Rev Paisley, have really reached a wonderful consensus of trying to bring Northern Ireland up to the standard where the Republic of Ireland is today.
And you're optimistic that this will continue and this reconciliation will continue.
I'm bowled over by the fact of my optimism.
Oh, this is a plus.
I once said to people, I said that one can never go wrong by being pessimistic about Northern Ireland. And yet, in this last few months, I must say that I've changed completely. I think we see a willingness of both sides to work together to bring a peaceful resolution, but more importantly, an economic resurgence of Northern Ireland, which is certainly within its power right now.
Any lessons for the Middle East? Is there, or is it sui generis? Is it unique?
I think there's lessons for everybody. I'm not sure it's just for the Middle East, and I think there comes a time when people have to deal with their own history, and how they deal with their own history is maybe different in each way. I mean, in Argentina, they dealt with it in one way. In South Africa, they dealt with it with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I sense that in Northern Ireland, people aren't interested in that. They just want to move on. Okay? And so I think everybody understands in Northern Ireland that you have to let go of history sometimes.
Okay.
How you do is a real question.
Okay. Let's turn to, finally, 2008 politics. You are one of the chairpersons of the Irish Americans for Hillary?
I'm actually handling her Catholic outreach, so it's Catholic.
Okay, Catholic outreach.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
It means that we look at various messages. I guess it's a twofold thing. We represent a Catholic viewpoint within the campaign.
Okay.
We represent a community that has certain needs, certain viewpoints, and we bring that to the forefront of the campaign.
Now, when you say Catholic viewpoint, is there a Catholic viewpoint?
Well, I think there's an issue. I think.
And you alluded to certain issues.
Catholics are concerned about many issues. I mean, the polling shows that, as much more than the rest of the country, they're very much concerned about immigration, much more pro-immigration. They are much more involved in health care and communal issues. You know, as a people, as a religion, we're taught that our job is to take care of the less fortunate, and that we must engage in a communal effort to do so. So many of the issues that the Democratic Party has brought to the forefront are issues that ordinarily Catholics ought to be identifying with and are identifying with.
Life being an issue, though, that I would think would rend, Catholics as much as other populations as well.
I think that life is an issue. There's an issue that and it's an important issue. But polling again has shown that to most Catholics, it's not the only issue.
Right.
And so that while we may disagree with the party or certain positions of the party or certain candidates on that issue, that there are other issues that are as important to Catholics. Life does not begin at conception and end at birth. Life goes on, and we need to look at the whole person.
Okay. So that's one thing that you do. You tell them what else. What's the second piece?
Well,
of
the
that?
second is there. Unfortunately, in the last few years, there's been a perception in the Catholic community, and somewhat quite rightfully, that the party has left them, and that some disgraceful things have happened in the last few years, like having Bob Casey, who was the senator from. Or the governor of Pennsylvania, the father who was pro-life, refusing to allow him to speak at the convention. to show that the community now that the Democratic Party and our Democratic nominees are at least willing to listen and talk and engage in dialogue on a whole range of issues that are concerned to them.
Okay, go ahead.
And it's important that they understand, if it's not a new party, at least it's a party that has grown up in these issues.
Okay, quickly. You're a partisan. You're for Hillary. Can she lose the nomination?
You know, I'm looking at this in both my head and my heart, but my head also tells me that I'm looking at every single way, and there's just no way that she can lose the nomination.
Can she win the general election?
She can win the general election. I think it's going to be a very close general election. I think it's been close in the last 3 elections. It's going to be as close. Can she lose the general election? Yes, she can lose the general election. Can she win the general election? Yes, she can.
Okay, we got a minute to go. You've been involved in some really celebrated cases. The Eton Pates case, the Robert Chambers case. What is your most satisfying case and maybe your most disappointing and disheartening case?
And I would say they're both the same, and I would say that's the Eton Pates case.
Go ahead.
The most disheartening was I needed to make a case against Antonio Ramos, who was found responsible for the death of Eton Pates. We knew he did it. He's been found responsible, but we were never able to get a criminal conviction of him. But to do that, we had to go into surrogate's court and declare Eton legally dead.
Wow.
And so
gives me goosebumps. Go ahead.
And so that was the most disheartening day, but the most satisfying was that I was able finally to go back to the parents and says, we have fixed responsibility for this death.
Well, I remember, and I guess it was spring of '79 when that happened. I had a 2.5-year-old, and life was never the same again. You watched them. It was almost the 9/11 of parenting, I would think. It just sent chills, still sends chills down my spine.
It changed our lives forever.
Oof. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure. Hello, I'm Doug Muzzio. Let us know what you think about this show. You can reach us at CUNY.TV. When you get there, click on the bar that says Contact Us and send your email. Whatever it is. Thanks, no thanks, obnoxious, do it. Send it.